The Denver Nuggets have set the NBA world on fire on a Wednesday, scratch that, Tuesday afternoon here on the Rundown. But my question is, why now? Should the Denver Nuggets have waited to make changes at the head coaching and general manager position until after the upcoming postseason? Is a potential roster shakeup coming depending on how far the Nuggets advance in the postseason? And what does it mean for Nikola Jokic's title window that we've speculated up till now may be closing a little bit more each year? All things to come on today's Rundown. And we begin, as I mentioned, in the NBA, where ESPN's Shams Charania has set social media and NBA Twitter ablaze with his breaking news that the Denver Nuggets, who are currently sitting at the 4 seed in the West heading into the postseason just days away, have fired head coach Michael Malone and general manager Calvin Booth. Top assistant David Adelman is being named the interim head coach, who we can assume will lead the team through its final regular season games and into the postseason. And beyond that, who knows? My initial gut reaction to this is I'm a little bit surprised on the timing. I will just be frank with you. This is tied for the latest coaching change in NBA history, going back all the way to Hubie Brown in the 1980-1981 season. So again, my question is why? What could have been so bad that wasn't already manifested all the way up until this point, where we have seen issues bubbling beneath the surface with this team? It's been a narrative basically for years since they won the NBA title, which we just reminisced upon the other day on this show, that Michael Malone and Calvin Booth were not on the same page, as is a dichotomy that we see with general managers and head coaches in professional sports quite often, frankly, that a head coach whose job security and success is tied to the immediate results of the team in front of him, and a general manager who sees things from a little bit more of a 1,000-foot view and has eyes on the present, but also the future. Then you get into that infamous John Elway line of, we want to win now and from now on. Well, Michael Malone, after defending an NBA title, wanted to win now. He helped secure the first Larry O'Brien trophy in franchise history. He validated, at least on an initial sense, the greatness of Nikola Jokic and the core that was drafted and developed by Tim Connolly. As you can see, a lot of buzzing and things going on with this news, with today's news. But Michael Malone helped bring the franchise its first championship, validating the greatness on the initial sense of Nikola Jokic, and honestly helping validate the core that was drafted and developed by Tim Connolly before his departure to Minnesota. Calvin Booth comes in and brings in Kentavious Caldwell-Pope and Bruce Brown, amongst some other moves, which helps take that core that Tim Connolly created and lifts it up past that, just that hump that they couldn't get through, that Western Conference Finals ceiling. They become NBA champions. But from then on, it felt like the fork in the road started to widen, and you could see it and hear it in their public comments. Things felt tense on the surface in press conferences and behind the scenes. And eventually, as the Nuggets continued to struggle, most infamously last season when they lost in 7 games in the second round of the NBA playoffs to the Minnesota Timberwolves, finishing with the exclamation point of blowing a 20-point lead on your home court in a Game 7. And it's just felt like this thing has been chipping away and festering. And this apparently was the bubbling over point, the breaking point, the straw that broke the camel's back. And again, the timing of it suggests something had to spur this action, something. And I'm not 100% sure what it could be. Was it an argument behind the scenes? All of this, of course, pure speculation. But I just don't understand what something would have had to have rippled the waters enough to say, hey, with 3 games left, 2 games left in the regular season, and a postseason with pivotal implications on deck, we are going to make not just a coaching change, but a front office change and shake the snow globe up vigorously, which inherently puts them at a disadvantage heading into the playoffs. More will come. We don't 100% know all the details. We do have a statement from Josh Kroenke, who is kind of the head honcho for KSE that oversees the Nuggets, the son of Stan. Here is the quote from Josh Kroenke. Quote, "This decision was not made lightly and was evaluated very carefully. And we do it only with the intention of giving our group the best chance at competing for the 2025 NBA championship," end quote. Okay. One, I kind of think that that's what somebody in Josh Kroenke or any kind of team ownership position is going to say after dropping an absolute bomb like the one that was dropped at Ball Arena today. But also, I think we just need to be transparent and say, frankly, I think that's a crock. If you think that firing the head coach and the general manager is going to give you the best chance, the best parameters, and the right environment to then turn around after 2 more regular season games with a flawed and broken roster that we've watched up to this point, and that's suddenly going to allow them to go on a magical run through a loaded Western Conference where they've struggled to beat teams over 500. They have a 14-21 record for teams that are just 1 game over 500 or better. And this move, this is going to help them push it forward? No, I don't buy it. I don't buy it. You can say that it was time. Maybe it was overdue. As I mentioned, these 2 gentlemen in Malone and Calvin Booth were clearly on opposite pages for the majority of their tenure, especially post NBA championship. But you had times to address that, and you had times to massage it. And my assumption is you've been massaging it up to this point, and you chose now to do it. So if that's what you want to pursue as your course of action, be my guest. But don't put out a press release with a bunch of chicken you-know-what and tell me it's chicken salad by saying this gives them, with David Adelman and an incomplete and a locker room who is now going to have to process all these things with minimal time before the postseason starts, that is the best course of action for the 2025 NBA championship push. I'm not here for it. Somebody who I have a feeling might be here for it is Will Peterson. Scrappy Will, you are one of our intrepid analysts and reporters and writers at DenverSports.com. Were you as shocked as I was to see this news from Shams Charania come down not just 20 minutes ago?
Yeah, I mean, sure, it's shocking for sure, Richie. There's no doubt about it. But it is ironic that I wrote a column this morning at DenverSports.com with the headline being, "Everyone but Nikola Jokic could be on the hot seat if the Nuggets collapse." Well, guess what? Josh Kroenke woke up and had the same thought because he fired his head coach and fired his GM. Unprecedented. I mean, unprecedented. Latest firing in the NBA since 1980-81, Richie.
Brown.
I mean, this is just nuts to fire the head coach and fire the GM. But I do disagree with you a little bit. I don't think this season was going anywhere. I admit this is a Hail Mary. Don't get me wrong. Absolute Hail Mary. But you still have Nikola Jokic in his prime playing the best basketball of his career. So why not throw a Hail Mary? Because if Malone was still the coach, you were either going to lose in the play-in or you were going to lose in round 1. Now, fired coach theory, maybe something crazy happens.
What do you think, as I was pontificating before you came in and sat down, what do you think spurred the action from Josh Kroenke and company to do this now with just a couple of games left in the regular season before the postseason begins versus waiting until the offseason, or frankly, doing it before the start of the season, where I would imagine a lot of these same issues that were manifesting that led to this moment still existed? What was the straw that broke the camel's back?
Maybe the Minnesota game, like Russell Westbrook missing layups and he's closing and now they've lost 4 in a row. Like, I also think, Richie, we've never seen Nikola Jokic this frustrated.
Nope.
Right? In his entire career, we've never seen the visible emotions on the bench. So I think what happened, Josh talked to Nikola. I would be stunned if Josh and Nikola didn't talk before this decision got made. And I'm just guessing here. I don't have a source on this. I'm just guessing. Nikola Jokic signed off on this. And that's what's spurring this to happen right now, is that Josh Kroenke truly does believe the Nuggets can still accomplish something special this season. And once he had the blessing of the Joker, he said, I don't care if my timing seems odd. He pulled the trigger.
Yep. I could not agree with you more. I absolutely think that given the timeline of this decision, given the fact that there's just a couple of games remaining in the regular season, the postseason on the horizon, and frankly, the importance of maximizing every NBA postseason during this stretch of years in order to keep Nikola Jokic's prime and their championship window in the front view, this had to be spurned by the locker room. I think this had to be with Nikola Jokic as the main dominating voice in the locker room. This had to be a situation where Nikola Jokic, who, as you mentioned, Will, has been as frustrated as we've ever seen him. And it's not just frustration. There's a sense of resignment or defeat to it, to where he's staring down, averaging a 50-plus point triple-double over a 3-game stretch, and they can't buy a win during that time. He has the most prolific scoring triple-double in NBA history, and yet he's sitting on the sideline watching things just bungle in front of him. And there seems like Jokic, who is kind of the supercomputer, right? He is the basketball AI, as Zach Bai likes to call him, where he is presented with a challenge or a wrench or a hurdle, and he adjusts and adapts and molds to it. Well, he's continued to do that at, frankly, the greatest rate of his career up to this point, maybe having one of the greatest NBA seasons of all time, and it's not enough. And that, beyond frustration, I think that starts to sink in, this feeling of defeat and resignment or resentment toward your situation. And then you see the trickle effects. You saw Jake Shapiro put out that video, I know, on our social media accounts the other day, of Aaron Gordon and Payton Watson getting into it, chippy on the sideline. Russell Westbrook having to be forced by the NBA to speak to the media after 2 or 3 games where he just had horrific end of games decisions that cost them in crunch time. And when he is forced to speak to the media, he gives almost like moody Jamal Murray level answers of just like, oh, I don't know, maybe
total non-answers.
Total non-answers.
Oh, sorry, man, I can't answer your question.
So you add all of those things in and of themselves, I think, are worth noting, but not overreacting to. But you start putting all these blocks together, and suddenly this problem goes from a molehill into more of a mountain. And I think it had to be Josh Kroenke's realization that this locker room has fractured, and there's a toxic feeling and a vibe that is spurred by the complete opposite pages of the general manager and the head coach. And this was the only way to try to remedy it.
Yeah. And guess what? Trade deadline has come and gone, right? And you couldn't even trade Jamal Murray this year if you had wanted to. Like, you couldn't trade Murray or Porter or Gordon. So what was the logical step? You had to fire Malone, and then you had to fire Booth, because there would have been outrage if Booth kept his job and Malone didn't. And I think the order, ticked off a lot of Nuggets fans that we found out about Malone, and then we found out about Booth 5-10 minutes later. But I think you're onto something, that Josh Kroenke knows my locker room's a mess, and my only chance of having any sort of success this year is doing something crazy, doing something drastic. And firing your head coach and your GM is crazy, and it's drastic. And that's the decision he made. But can this season be salvaged? I think that's an interesting question that I think perhaps, but I'm not predicting it, right? Like, there's a universe where it can be salvaged, but I'm not sitting here telling you, oh, plan the parade, Richie. Malone's gone, Nuggets are winning the title. I don't think that's how this is going to work.
Yeah, no, I had talked yesterday about, if you were looking for reasons for optimism for a Nuggets team that has the best player in the world and has comparable players or complementary pieces around the best player in the world that at their ceiling can be championship caliber players. We've seen it happen. The pontification over whether or not Jamal Murray could be the second best player on a title team is over. It happened. He was. But the problem was the consistency of it, or the lack of consistency, I should say. And I think that when you look at the way that the roller coaster of this season has unfolded, the championship aspirations for the Nuggets look bleak. We had talked yesterday. I had talked with some people and some guests here on the show about, if you're looking for a ray of sunshine or optimism, you could look to the 94-95 Houston Rockets, who started the postseason in the 6th seed in the West, but they had the best player in the world at the time in Hakeem Olajuwon, and they had championship experience. They had won a championship in the past. And they went on to make a run and win the title because the best player in the world proved his worth. And
the real best player in the world was playing baseball. Just to be
best
fair,
player in the league.
Best player in the league.
Best player in the league.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. During the timing of that, Michael Jordan.
Michael Jordan was playing baseball at the time.
But my point, they had the best player in the league who proved his worth in that aspect, and the players around him found a way to click and come together and reignite using the championship mettle and experience that they had formed, and that the Nuggets, in theory, could follow the same path. Up until 35 minutes ago, I would have said maybe there's a chance, because that's just how good Jokic is, and we've seen the ceiling for these other players. when you drop a bomb in the middle of Ball Arena like this, I don't know how that helps the chances for some kind of playoff turnaround. I know you could bring up the concept of, the fired coach theory. We saw it with the Raiders and Rich Bisaccia in the NFL. We've seen it. Actually, it happens a lot in the NFL. But this just doesn't feel like that vibe to me.
No, I don't think it feels like that vibe. But could you have told me an hour ago with a straight face that the Nuggets were going to win the NBA title this year? No. And now you probably still can't, but at least something has changed. At least something is different. And again, no one's rooting for people to lose their jobs, okay? But this is pro sports, right? And it's not kid gloves. And Michael Malone made a lot of money to be the Denver Nuggets head coach, and he had lost the locker room. So when you lose the locker room, this is the kind of stuff that happens. And just because Malone had been tenured here so long, look around the league. Milwaukee, Toronto, teams that won titles fired their coaches too. This is not unprecedented.
Usually it's about a 3-year window after winning a title that coach is fired.
And I think Nuggets fans probably haven't felt this shocked since George Karl got fired in 2013 after winning Coach of the Year.
Well, last question on this before we transition to something a little bit happier. Do you expect, and if so, what do you expect is coming for the Denver Nuggets potentially in the form of a roster shakeup this offseason, given the clearing of house at head coach and general manager?
Oh, I think EBJ, everyone but Jokic. I mean, this is putting everyone on notice that you could trade Jamal Murray, you could trade Michael Porter Jr., you could trade Aaron Gordon, like major core championship pieces, especially with a brand new GM and a brand new head coach. You might just look at it, again, depending on what happens in the postseason, but you might just look at it and say, that Nikola Jokic guy is really good, but we need to shuffle everything around him. Richie, I think no one but Jokic is safe.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think that you have made the drastic move on the forefront to set up an offseason. And if you're going to be open-minded enough to make the latest or tied for the latest coaching change in the history of the National Basketball Association, you cannot be closed-minded when it comes to roster construction for the new coach and the new front office and how they decide to enter this next chapter of Nuggets basketball. Okay, it is time to continue our Mile High Milestones countdown presented by your local Ford dealers. We are nearing the top of our countdown from 30 to 1 of the 30 biggest storylines in Colorado sports in celebration of DenverSports 104.3 The Fan's 30th anniversary. We have arrived inside the top 5 at number 4 at one of the most memorable sporting experiences, certainly of my lifetime, and something we may never see in Major League Baseball ever again, and that is the magic that was Rocktober. Will, you grew up in this town. You are very familiar with the Rockies as a Rockies fan, and you've covered sports here, especially with us and even before us, for quite a while. I know that you have a lot of strong and fond memories of this time. So if we go back to mid-September 2007, where it felt like the Rockies were staring at a season not that unlike a lot of seasons we've seen from them in the past. They were sitting right over 500, 76, 72, and they lose to the Florida Marlins at that time by a score of 10-2, and they're sitting at 4th in the NL West. And it's looking like, well, here we go again. Here's another non-postseason contending season for the Colorado Rockies. Well, they win 13-0 in the rubber match against the Florida Marlins, and they're staring at a 4-game stretch with the Los Angeles Dodgers, who even back then, it felt like it was going to be a tough game, maybe not as tough as it is now. And then something clicked. And for me, and I'd be curious to get your thoughts, this moment, Todd Helton's home run, his walk-off home run against Takashi Saito, felt like, potentially looking back on it, the start of the Rocktober run. That was the moment that signified, wait a minute, there might be some life here. What does your mind remember as the start of that run? And did you feel like there was momentum brewing in that moment at that time?
Yeah, you nailed it. Helton hitting the walk-off home run against Saito was the catalyst for all this, because what happened after he hit that home run, Richie? Todd ripped his helmet off and did a primal scream. And I remember the broadcast going, you never see Todd Helton show emotion like this. Do you think he wants it? Of course he wants it. And then the Rockies just get red hot, right? They can't lose. They can't lose. They can't lose until a game on a Friday night against the Arizona Diamondbacks where they lose. And now all of a sudden you've got 2 to go and you're 2 back just to get into old game 163. And the Rockies beat the Diamondbacks twice. and the Milwaukee Brewers do you a massive favor and beat the San Diego Padres twice. And that, of course, sets the stage for game 163, which to this day is still the most memorable sporting event I've ever been at in my life.
Yep. They had 14 prior to that walk-off home run. They had 14 regular season games left. They win 13 of the 14, the only loss there that you aforementioned. And they get to the play-in game against the Padres. And even then, there was a moment where the door to all of the magic that was Rocktober could have been slammed shut. They bring in Trevor Hoffman on the mound, and that sets up Jamie Carroll for one of the more magical moments, I think, in franchise history, hitting a sac fly, leading to the controversial,
right,
in some ways, home plate touching or not touching by Matt Holliday. We do have a photograph from that famous game and that famous slide. Hometown bias aside, and this is a safe space here.
Okay, safe.
Do you think Matt Holliday touched home plate?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say yes, but man, no matter how many photos you look at that, the evidence is kind of damning, and that's just one angle. There's like 6 angles of this thing. Matt Holliday's slide into home plate is second, maybe only to the Zapruder film of footage that has been analyzed and scrutinized on a frame-by-frame level. And I kind of don't think he touched it.
Well, okay, hold on. We are very glad that replay was not a thing yet.
Yes, that is fair.
That's the thing, is the ump, and I remember the ump. It was a guy by the name of Tim McClellan. And the play happens, and he takes his time, Richie. He takes his time, and luckily, Michael Barrett, the Padres catcher, had lost the baseball. But I remember I was fortunate enough to be about 10 rows up on the first baseline. It's like the longest 2 seconds of my life. And then all of a sudden, McClellan does safe, and the crowd just absolutely erupts. And Troy Tulowitzki's out there swinging his towel and jumping around. And you mentioned that inning, too, though. Don't forget, they were down 8-6.
Yes.
Because Jorge Julio, of all people, came in and gave up a 2-run home run in the top of the 13th. Mm-hmm. And how does that inning go? I always say if I'm on Jeopardy, I want my category to be Rocktober because I remember everything. Yes. Kaz Matsui doubles. Troy Tulowitzki doubles. Matt Holliday triples on what we thought was a walk-off home run. Todd Helton gets intentionally walked to set up, as you mentioned, Jamie Carroll to be the hero. But you're talking about the greatest closer, or one of the greatest closers in the history of baseball. Yep. And the Rockies get 3 runs off him. And there's a documentary about this. And I think the announcer says something like, little did the Rockies know the fun was just starting. Like 163 was awesome. There was still a lot of baseball after that too.
You can almost look at it. You know, we've had fun. We've had fun with like some athletes over time. Like Tom Brady had a Hall of Fame career in like 3 different decades. You could split. Kobe had a Hall of Fame career wearing the number 8 and wearing the number 24. There was like 3 different magical runs or segments within Rocktober itself, sweeping the Dodgers twice and the Padres to win 13 of the last 14 regular season games just to get to a chance to make a play-in for a chance to get to the postseason, having the magical moment against in the play-in game, and then sweeping Philly in the NLDS, sweeping the D-backs in the NLCS, and getting to the World Series before obviously we know how it ended in a sweep in the other direction. But Will, winning 21 out of 22 games for a team that with 14 or so games left in the regular season looked like they were dead to rights from a wild card perspective, and really just injecting hope and life into a franchise that hadn't seen a playoff berth since the mid-90s prior to Rocktober. What do you think signified what do you think the magical element was to this 2017 that helped click Rocktober?
Again, I think it was Helton, because Helton was sick of losing, right? And Holliday was the best player on that team. Actually got robbed of the 2007 NL MVP. But I think it was Helton having clutch moments where he showed emotion. Like even in Philly, his first at bat of his life in the playoffs, he ripped a double off the wall in game 1. You know, and that sort of set the tone of like, hey, we're supposed to be here. I mean, Richie, you had Kaz Matsui hitting grand slams in Philadelphia against the Phillies. I was a senior in high school, and I remember having my radio, and I snuck it in my clothes and then just sat there like this all day to listen to it. And my teacher's like, does your ear hurt? I'm like, oh yeah, my ear really hurts, because he knew exactly what I was doing, but he wasn't going to be a jerk about it. So yeah, stuff like that. And then even against the Diamondbacks, you have Willie Tavares making just an unbelievable catch in center field. You had Eric Burns became the villain, remember? And then his face is in the dirt to end game 4 when Helton's raising his arms to celebrate going to the World Series. Like, there are just so many iconic moments. And yes, guys stepped up, but to me, it all comes back to Todd Helton of like, he was sick of being a great player on a bad team, and he really helped the Rockies eventually break through and go to their first and only ever World Series.
I will never forget the mad scramble and the crashing of ticketing sites like Ticketmaster and others trying to. I remember being in my my community church in Parker with a bunch of people who were part of the congregation, and everyone's on their phone, everyone's on their laptop. We're all like huddled together trying to get tickets, and where are you at in the queue, and where are you, and where are you? And then the computer crashes and the site goes down, and it was pandemonium in the best way possible. When it comes to the actual World Series, they obviously got swept by the Boston Red Sox. Was it simply a matter that the Boston Red Sox were just that much better of a team, or did the 9-day break between the championship series and the World Series kind of turn Cinderella's carriage back into a pumpkin and slow down all the momentum that they'd been building?
Yeah, it was the time off in my eyes, Richie. It was the worst thing that ever happened to them. Was they were too good. They were too hot. And then the Red Sox and Cleveland go 7, right? And you know, I remember Clint Hurdle like took him down to Arizona, which I actually didn't hate, you know, like, hey, let's go down to the spring training site. Let's go work down there. But baseball is the most timing sport of them all. And when you lose that timing, you lose the magic. They lose the first game of the World Series, something like 11-1 or something. They just got their tails kicked. And then even game 2, they had a chance. And you'll remember it was 2-1 in the 9th inning. And Matt Holliday gets a base hit to right. And here comes Helton. And it's like Helton's going to hit a 2-run home run, and they're going to win this game 3-2. Matt Holliday got picked off first base by Jonathan Papelbon and took the bat out of Helton's hand. And then they come back here and they're pitching like Josh Fogg. And Josh Fogg was a nice story, but the Red Sox scored like 10 runs in game 3, and you knew it was over at that point. So I go back to the time off, man. If they had started the World Series 48 hours after sweeping the Diamondbacks, I think we're talking about the Rockies winning the whole thing.
It sounds silly at times, especially for what the team has gone through since Rocktober. And there's been a couple of playoff flirtations and things of that nature over the years. It sounds silly almost to say it now, but Rocktober and the magic and the hysteria that resulted out of that 21 out of 22 game stretch has always led me to believe that if, and I know it's a bigger if in 2025 than it was in 2007, if the Rockies were to ever miraculously win a World Series, that the fan base reaction, the celebration, the parade, and the pandemonium would maybe not eclipse, but would at a minimum rival that we've seen from the Denver Broncos in their Super Bowl victories because of the dormant baseball town and state that exists here in Colorado. What say you, Will Peterson?
Yeah, Denver's a great baseball town, and don't let anyone ever tell you different. I make party deck jokes like I'm a catalyst of that, because we've reached the phase of apathy. But the only hope, and I know this is a big but, and people are going to tell me it's never going to happen, if Dick Monfort sold the Rockies, which would be all our hopes and dreams. You know, we were talking about the shock of Malone and Booth getting fired today. Well, if we ever get a breaking news, Dick Monfort selling the Rockies, that
would be the most shocking sports story.
This town will rejoice. It's unlikely, but that would be my hope, is that he finally wakes up, realizes he's not the right guy for the job, cashes in on his billions. And I think you kind of hinted at it there. We are a sleeping giant of a baseball town. Unfortunately, we've just morphed into thinking baseball is just margaritas and not actually watching the game. But if that were to happen, oh, baby, it could be a lot of fun. And maybe Rocktober Part 2. I mean, we're both I'm in my mid-30s, you're in your early 30s. Will we see it in our lifetime, Richie?
If you had to ask me, my gut would say no. Yeah. My gut would say no. I just don't
But
know.
I never thought the Nuggets would win a title in my life either.
True. That is true. Nikola Jokic erased a lot of people's fear and anxiety about whether or not they would live long enough to see their favorite basketball team win a title. Maybe that's a you should never say never kind of sign from the sports gods as it relates to the Colorado Rockies. Will, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for chiming in on what was one of the more magical. Boy, the top 3 on this list have a pretty high bar to clear to be bigger in terms of a hype and hysteria storyline locally and frankly nationally than what Rocktober was for Major League Baseball. So I can't wait to see what's next coming up the rest of this week, and we'll get to check in again soon, my friend.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Richie.
Cheers. I want to get to, before we close out today, I can see that there are comments sprawling in all over the place, mostly in relation to the breaking news we got in the NBA regarding the firing of Nuggets head coach Michael Malone and general manager Calvin Booth. So, Trey, behind the glass, fire away. Let's see what the tone of the people is and whether or not it matches my pulse. This is wild. And you just woke up to this. Well, I mean, honestly, solid. You're going to wake up at noon. That's cool. But this would be a crazy thing. For one, I would have thought that I was still dreaming. And when I was driving in my car about 45 minutes ago and saw this breaking news, I had to check 3 times whether or not it was a fake Shams Charania or some kind of Twitter account that was trying to pull my leg April Fool's style on a non-April Fool's Day. So I'm totally with you, man. It's over anyway. Well, if you're saying it's over in the sense of this year, I might tend to agree with you. I know Will Peterson, who was just in here, disagreed with that sentiment that they could get a bump. And maybe it's more likely than not over, as Will maybe mentioned, but this could, in theory, present a catalyst, as unlikely as it might be, to spur the team forward, especially if the locker room was the driving force that spurred this action from Josh Kroenke to make this move, which, again, was tied for the latest coaching change in NBA history since 1980 with Hubie Brown. So, Thomas, Kroenke doesn't mess around. You're right. I don't disagree. I think that the way that, well, this move proves that he doesn't mess around. But I think this has also been something that's been brewing for a handful of years now. And who knows what efforts maybe were made behind the scenes to try to remedy this. As we all knew, as I'm sure it was just as evident to us as it was to you out there, the fan base, that Michael Malone and Calvin Booth were not on the same page. And I'm sure there were efforts to try to massage this, reconcile this, and keep this boat sailing straight. And this, I think, was an admission that that was no longer possible. So in that sense, I will agree with you, Thomas, that Kroenke's not messing around today. Ben, it makes no sense now. There is zero to gain doing it now. Ben, I actually think that's a fair argument. As I mentioned at the start of the show, I don't understand why you would do it now instead of doing it in the offseason. Or frankly, if it was bad enough to do it now, why wasn't it bad enough before the trade deadline or at the start of the season? You know what I'm saying? I don't understand. And if you had done it earlier, you could have given the new coach and new staff time to gel, time to potentially look at trade deadline moves if they had done it pre-deadline. So, Ben, I agree with you. I don't 100% understand the timing. My only speculation is that this came from Jokic and it came from the locker room, that they had felt fractured and it was a toxic environment, that the only remedy was to pull the ripcord early and say, we cannot last another day under these conditions, regardless of what it means for our postseason ceiling. Even though if you're Josh Kroenke and the statement that they released on behalf of the team, that they did this move with the hope and intention of furthering the 2025 championship pursuit, which I don't 100% agree with. Randy says it's a head start on a better GM and coach before the offseason beginning, if anything. How much is that head start worth? What negotiations and contract or conversations are they going to be having when they're in the throes of a playoff hunt? Because you can't say that you're making this move with the intention of salvaging and pushing forward on a 2025 championship pursuit and then say, hey, well, we're going to give things off to lead assistant David Adelman, but we're going to have our eyes turned another way because we want a head start on a head coach and a GM search. I don't think that makes logical sense. And if that is where their mindset is, I think that's a little bit foolish, because I just don't think it works that way. And obviously there's back channeling and conversations that have, especially in the NBA, where head coaches tend to be a little bit incestuous. And I mean, it feels like every year there's a new team for Doc Rivers and things of that like. So I'm sure that when they made this move, they've already got a short list of names in mind. I just don't know if they're going to reap the massive benefit of a head start, Randy, that you are hypothesizing there. From Alex, a stupid move by inept ownership by who ain't involved, like Pat Bowlen, who ain't involved like Pat Bowlen was. Well, that's true. If you're going to try to put the Cronkies next to Pat Bowlen in terms of ownership, involvement, and passion and dedication to winning, that's going to be a tough one to beat. Now, I will say that I think the Walton Penner ownership group is certainly reviving a lot of the tradition and defending the tradition that Pat Bowlen laid with the Denver Broncos. But the Kroenke, KSE and the Kroenke family has brought 2 championships in 2 different sports to the city of Denver in the last 5 years. So I don't want to sit here and say they have no commitment to winning. I actually think more of the ineptitude has come from below Kroenke with the 2 people that were just fired. I think some of Calvin Booth's philosophical approaches to offseason and trade deadline acquisitions and or dealings were a bit flawed. I think that there was some potentially intentional undermining on the behalf of Calvin Booth toward his head coach and Michael Malone because of their difference in philosophy between win now and win in the future. And that's going to become kind of an infamous quote or moment in this relationship between these 2 men who no longer work for the Denver Nuggets, where it was Michael Malone wants to win now, and Calvin Booth was adamant that he's focused on taking the San Antonio Spurs model of winning 2 or 3 in 6 years, not going back to back. And I just think that that's a tricky balance to try to navigate, because you can't choose when you're going to be able to make these runs, and you can't account for what the rest of the league, the rest of the conference, the rest of the division, etc., is going to do around you that then impacts your chances to be able to contend 3 times in a span of 6 years or twice in 2 years, if that makes sense, Alex. From Ronnie, they should have just fired the GM, not Malone. Well, you kind of are striking a chord with me in a sense of I actually was more frustrated with some of the Calvin Booth decisions than I was Michael Malone, because I sided more with Malone's philosophy of things of you won an NBA title for the first time in franchise history. You had a core together that had proven and established themselves to have championship mettle and experience, and striking while the iron's hot is always going to resonate more with me than trying to play the John Elway and apparently the Calvin Booth approach of trying to focus on winning from now on. And in Calvin Booth's case, even if it means sacrificing the present. I think that always sounds good on paper until it doesn't work. And the more you project into the future, the less control you have in the present. So I do think that I was more frustrated with Calvin Booth's side of things, but by cleaning house together, you prevent there from being a holdover that the locker room and the rest of the organization would have to deal with. And you allow these 2 new figures, a head coach and a GM, to come in together, to be aligned with one another in an organic sense, not a holdover sense of, that we have to bring in a GM that just toes the line for Michael Malone, who maybe wasn't always right in his navigational compass either in the way that they approach things. And I do think that Michael Malone, as a defensive coach who has coached a team for the last handful of years that's been pretty abysmal defensively, does deserve some blame in this regard. So I don't like when you start splitting the GM and the head coach. And I think you see it manifest itself a lot in the NFL, where you have you hire a head coach, and then that team fires the GM, who then helps hire the head coach, then hires the next GM, who turns around and fires him. And a lot of times with bad teams, that involves drafting a quarterback. And you start having this misalignment between general manager, head coach, and roster or star player in an NBA sense that can make things a little bit sticky and log jam it more than you might intend. So, Ronnie, I agree with you that the Booth's frustrations were maybe a little bit more than Malone's from my vantage point, but I think the cleaning of the house probably was the best move, even if the timing was weird. From Mark, is this what makes Jokic decide to just stay in Serbia and race his horses now? Again, on the surface, very fair question, because this, as Will Peterson and I spoke to just a few minutes ago, this has been the most frustrated I think we've seen Nikola Jokic in a good amount of time. And he has always been kind of this unique blend of a player, the anti-NBA superstar in a sense that it comes across sometimes like he doesn't care. I personally vehemently disagree with that statement. I think Jokic is an intense and fierce competitor. I think that he is so passionate about the game of basketball, but I also think that he does not allow the game of basketball to consume him and or swallow up the other interests he has in life, from his family to his homeland to things like horse racing and the like. So I think that it's fair to speculate, and I certainly hope that this is not a move that would force Jokic to maybe lean more into life after basketball and or without the Nuggets, Mark. But I will also say that I think the timing of this move is frankly spurred by the locker room and the lead voice in that discussion as the one person you need to keep happy, the one untouchable in Will Peterson's EBJ, everyone but Jokic offseason plan, is Nikola. So I don't think Nikola cares enough to go speak with Josh Kroenke, if that's what happened, or voice his opinion on this, and spur the firing of his head coach, who he had developed a bond with, and Calvin Booth, who had helped bring in pieces that allowed Nikola Jokic to lead this team to a championship. I don't think Nikola Jokic goes through the effort to speak up against or in favor of a change at those two positions if he's just at the end of the day thinking about going back to horse racing. Now, if the next pairing that they bring in doesn't work any better, or if it becomes harder, I think that clock starts ticking a little bit faster with each passing year. So I will knock on any wood surface around and hope that that's not the case. But for now, Mark, I think that Jokic is more focused on trying to continue to maximize his NBA career. And I think this is just the next chapter of that. Thank you all so much for joining me on a action-packed, filled, news-heavy, breaking news day here in Denver as we see the departure of the winningest head coach in Denver Nuggets history in Michael Malone and the general manager in Calvin Booth, who helped bring in the pieces to allow the team to successfully pursue its first championship in franchise history over the 47 years of their existence. I can only imagine the discourse and the fallout that is going to come as the end of the regular season into the postseason, as David Adelman, the lead assistant, tries to lead them into what I have always viewed as a pivotal playoff push or playoff resulting season that will change dramatically the trajectory of the franchise going forward. And I think this is the table setting for that. So much more to react to. We will be here for it right here on the Rundown every weekday, Monday to Friday at noon on DenverSports 104.3 The Fan from 6A to 7P, and the most immediate and up-to-date sports information at your fingertips at DenverSports.com and on the Denver Sports app. We'll get into it all tomorrow. We'll see you then. I do what I love what I do. Second nature to put in the